This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jean Enright, the Planning Director, and along with me tonight is Andrew Shapiro, Community and Economic Development Director, and Dan Beckley, Staff Planner, as well as Emily Innes of Innes Design, the consultant firm we have engaged with to study and make recommendations for updating our zoning requirements for the downtown area. As some of you are aware, the downtown area has a number of underlying zoning districts, as well as a zoning overlay district. Both the 2018 Master Plan and the 2021 Downtown Improvement Master Plan recommended review of the existing zoning bylaw, and based on that review, make recommendations for improvements. Emily is working on doing just that. So I'll turn this over to Emily and she will present the presentation and seek some input.
Thank you very much, Jean, and thank you all for attending. Delighted to have you here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in response to some of our questions tonight. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you can all see it, and walk you through our agenda today. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the planning process that we're doing, talk some about the zoning and some of what I've seen, as the consultant in the downtown. And then we're going to explore different aspects of the zoning tonight. So you see some of them listed up there. Throughout that, we'll have some interactive polling just to keep everybody awake and engaged. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a chance to do Q&A. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat. Dan Beckley, also town staff, is going to be monitoring those. So, you don't have to wait to ask your question, just throw it in the chat and I'll get started. So for this planning process, there's a couple of overlapping pieces right now. I'm doing some research into the zoning itself and the precedents. And then this is part of the community discussion. I've also been doing individual interviews with people who have a familiarity with the zoning in the downtown. Some of them may be property owners or developers, but people do have a general experience with the zoning as it stands now. And then both of those are going to overlap a little bit with the development of draft recommendations. We'll be coming back to the public once we've tested those. But what we're talking about today is going to feed into how those draft development process moves. So a lot of people think about zoning just as land use controls, and for those people who think about zoning at all. But it's important to understand that zoning has a real ability to help with the revitalization of a downtown. So while it does control land and which uses go where, by doing that, it helps a town decide how do they want their downtown to function, what uses do they want to be there, what do they want their downtown to look like, how did the dimensional standards of zoning, how did the design guidelines that are development standards that can be incorporated into zoning, all of those contribute to people's physical experience of an area, of moving through it, but also what they can access in terms of goods, services, and jobs. So as we look at zoning, as we look particularly at the downtown overlay, we're really trying to understand how does this affect the downtown in terms of what people want to see. And so some of our conversation today is going to be about that. I will also say that design guidelines or development standards, in addition to guiding how people experience an area once the area is built or as it's being built, also help to manage expectations during the application process. So whether it is, a planning board, a ZBA, a developer getting ready to do an application, or a property owner getting ready to do an application, or members of the public who are reviewing things to keep themselves informed as to what's going on, there's an ability to set some clear expectations around how people can look at and measure the an application against what community expectations are for an area. So we'll, over the course of this process, talk a little bit about that. And then finally, the approval process can be just as important as the zoning itself in terms of attracting new businesses, new development. And so we're going to be looking at that as part of this overall process. So one of the things I did, Jean took me on a site tour of the area, and I also spent some time on my own taking some pictures and getting a sense of the character of the area. You can see a couple of slides that I'm going to show you where I just call out some of the different parts of the downtown. The site walk also went into the Mill District, so you'll see some pictures from that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the areas here. So as you see, this is sort of the one section of Main Street. And it's interesting to see, for me, the different types of buildings that are there, the different materials, whether it's a flat roof building or it's a pitched roof building. How do the storefronts relate to each other and to the building itself? What types of uses are in each building? When's the last time some of the buildings were upgraded? And what I see throughout here is a real variety in terms of setbacks. So you have some buildings that are set back further from the street, in which case we like to look at what's going on in the front yard setbacks, sometimes in the side yard setbacks, differences in how the storefronts are organized, the condition of the buildings. All of these start to feed into looking at zoning. And it's important for a couple of reasons. One, in that zoning helps codify what a community wants to see in terms of physical development, in terms of uses, but also frequently zoning has come into play after buildings have been built. So in our older New England neighborhoods, many of them were laid out prior to zoning actually being instituted. So it's important to understand what's there and whether or not the zoning is consistent with what's there. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And that very much depends on the community and on the community's goals. So again, moving up a little further into the downtown, again, seeing a variety of uses, a variety of building conditions and sizes. And thinking about if we were to change the zoning, what impact would it have on those? So just as a test, I'm going to call out, start up our first set of questions. Let me pull this up now, and this will get you moving on our polling situation. So you should all see a poll in front of you. Asking, what do you think about the downtown? This is multiple choice. So on this one, you can choose as many options as you like. And I would, I'll read them out to you as you're thinking about it. So what do you think about the downtown as it is now? Do you wish more retail, more restaurant, that it looked more artsy or creative? Do you like it just the way it is? And if you have thoughts that are not represented here, because we just wanted to give you a broad couple of ideas, feel free to put anything additional in the chat. That would be very helpful. And I'll just give you a few minutes as I monitor how many answers we're getting.
So quick question, if I may.
Yes.
Your list on the slide does not match your list on the poll. And if I wanted to choose C from the slide, which is not on the poll, you want me to just write it in?
Just write it in, yes. And I apologize for that. I was working back and forth and missed C. C from the question on the slide. And I will retabulate that when I reanalyze this. Great. I'm seeing the chat comments coming in, and just have a few more people to answer. All right, that looks like it. I am going to end the poll and share the results so that you can all see. So 67% are looking for more retail options, 75% more restaurant options, lower amount, 25% artsy creative. Nobody on this call likes downtown the way it is. And then we've got some others in the chats coming in here. So, and I see that one person did not have the poll show up for him. Dan, would you mind checking? I know that sometimes the Zoom and the Apple platform don't always work. So if you can work with this gentleman, that'd be really helpful. So, and I apologize for that. All right, so I am going to close that, and then we'll move on to the Mill District. And have a look at that. So what's interesting about this, again, in thinking about the zoning, and we'll talk a little bit about some potential boundary options as well. But in looking at the Mill District in the downtown, you obviously are very familiar with this. They're, of course, completely different in terms of physical development, in terms of scale, in terms of material. So thinking about how you have these two areas that are quite close to each other, how they relate to each other, not just in terms of physical development, but in terms of uses. So in other words, do we want to cluster certain types of uses in one area versus another? Do we want to allow the sort of whichever area gets use A first, that's fine. Or do we want to retain these specific identities? So in thinking about that, I have the second poll, and hopefully we'll be able to, let's see. Sorry, let me just close that one down and open up the next poll. All right, we're going to launch this. So in this case, all of the questions are the same. Apologize for that first one. So thinking about this unique relationship within walking distance of each other, very different character. If you're going out to eat or are you running errands and you're going to both places, how would you get there? How would you think about your link between the two of them? And again, this one is a multiple choice. You can answer as many as you like as are appropriate. And if I didn't have an appropriate response here, please put that in the chat. Some good comments about the condition of the walking connection between the two. That's very helpful. And again, if you're not seeing the poll show up, I see there's one other person, feel free to write your answers in the chat if you'd like to. Give people a few more minutes. We've got about half of the people participating. All right, we seem to have slowed down on that, so I will just end the poll here and share the results with you all. So you'll see that A and B are equal. People are happy to park, those who answered are happy to park in one and walk to the other, or vice versa. A few people live close enough that they wouldn't need to drive. We've got some bicyclists in here. A few people who are not interested in walking, and I can see in the chat that there's some reasons in terms of the conditions. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much. So the next area I want to talk about a little bit is gateways, and this is going to be important when we start thinking about the boundary, potential for a boundary shift in terms of the area of the downtown overlay district. Gateways are a nice planning term for thinking about the approach and the entry into an area. So as we think about approaching Main Street, the main part of the downtown from either end, or from along Sutton Street, if you look at the images to the far right, how does it feel to approach an area? Do you feel that you're approaching a downtown area or approaching an area with a different identity from where you're coming from? So just looking at these pictures, you know, I normally would look for something like signage. I'd look for a change in materials. I'd look for, you know, some indication maybe of an increased density or a change in building style or something that lets me know that I'm approaching this particular spot within a community. So I want you to do the same thing, and I'll launch that poll. Just a second, here we go. And so again, thinking about individual things that you'd like to see here, ranging from just adding some signs and landscaping as you approach Sutton Street from either 495 or 125 and 133, and then turn onto Main Street. Thinking about Sutton Street, would you just add some signs and landscaping to indicate a change? You're interested in maybe mixed use, commercial on the ground floor, residential above, that sort of classic mixed use scenario. Some people might be interested in a mix of uses, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's standard commercial residential. No change, you're fine with it. Not sure yet. You'd like to learn a little bit more, or again, tell us in the chat. And this is helpful, your comments here, just to get you warmed up and thinking about the areas, but also because it lets us know areas of exploration in the next part of this planning process. So it's very, very useful for us. All right, so a few more people to participate. All right, looking like some great comments coming in as well. And I'm just going to end the poll and share your results. So about a little under a third adding some signs and landscaping, and about the same number, same percentage interested in the classical mixed use. A few others interested in a mix of uses, but not necessarily residential. And then some not sures. And as I said, a lot of others coming into the chat, which is great. Thank you very much. So let's actually now start to talk about the zoning more specifically. If you look at this map on the right, you'll see the downtown overlay district is in the green hatching. You can see the key up here. There's also the Machine Shop Village Neighborhood Conservation District in the black hatching. And then there are the underlying districts. So just a quick definition for the people who might not be as familiar with zoning on this call. Underlying zoning districts are the districts that are just, they're there, that is the zoning district. They will have uses and dimensional standards. And if you own a building or a property in there, that is the zoning that governs. There's also something called an overlay district, which sits on top of that's why it's called an overlay, it sits on top of the underlying district. And to use an overlay district, you typically have to meet certain other qualifications or requirements or restrictions. So for example, there are people who will put an overlay district for flood control, where it's applicable to any area that is likely to flood. There are wetlands, watershed protection overlay districts. There are mixed use overlay districts where your underlying district doesn't allow a mix of uses, but your overlay district does. Sometimes the overlay district requires a special permit to access it. Sometimes it doesn't. Different communities use them for different things. So in this case, the downtown overlay district is sitting on top of other zoning districts. So we have the general business, which is that brownish color there, sitting on top a little bit of the industrial 5 district, a little bit on top of R4, and a little bit on top of residence 5. And there's also a B2 in the abutting area here. And we're going to talk about that orange boundary in more detail later on, but just so you know, it represents a possible expansion of the downtown overlay district. You can see that that would mean that B2 would then be an underlying district for that expansion. So when you look at the as of right uses in the overlay district, the downtown overlay district, you'd see them grouped here in the green. And as of right means that you don't have to get a special permit for it. You can just go in and get a building permit for an as of right use. And I've grouped them into, on the far left, retail types of uses, in the middle, office uses at the top, and sort of amusement and restaurant uses, hospitality uses at the bottom, and then a little bit of residential on the top right, accessory uses. Now, what's interesting about the downtown overlay district is that it also says that all as of right uses in the underlying district are also as of right for the overlay. And that's an interesting twist. I haven't seen it that often. Usually an overlay district is allowing something that's not fully allowed in the underlying district. There's also a mill subdistrict to the downtown overlay district. And what I've called out here are some of the uses that either are allowed in the mill subdistrict that are not allowed in the main downtown overlay. So that would include light manufacturing, craft brewing, personal services establishments, museums. The mill district also has a prohibition on auto-oriented uses, which is not found in the downtown overlay district, and it has some size restrictions on the type of uses. So for example, it has certain retail uses under a certain size are allowed as of right, whereas over that size, they are a special permit. So if we look at the special permit, which is a different level of approval, for the downtown overlay district, again, you see them in green here. You see a little bit of that size restriction coming in the downtown overlay as well. Note again that all special permit uses in the underlying districts are part of the overlay. However, in the mill sub-district, it's a little bit different. For as of right and special permit uses, those uses that are not listed in this are expressly prohibited. So again, there's a little bit of a difference between the downtown overlay and the mill sub-district. That's interesting for us to explore. Now, just looking at the underlying districts, I scanned down through the current table of uses in the zoning. And what I'm calling out here are where there are differences between the districts or among the districts. So you see, for example, that R5 does not allow multifamily. R4 doesn't allow multifamily. R5 does with some restrictions. It's a special permit in B2. It's not allowed in general business. It's not allowed in I5. So again, what we're trying to do is look at what's allowed in the downtown overlay district, what's allowed in these underlying districts, and figure out, are there things that are allowed now that shouldn't be allowed? Are there things that should be allowed that are not currently allowed? And what might those be? And that's part of looking at the overlay district to see what modifications need to be made. So it's time for a series of quick polls. It's basically yes, no, maybe for all of these, or yes, no, maybe, not sure. What we've discovered in looking at this is that the overlay district is not including some uses that have served as revitalization tools in other communities. So I'd love to test a few of those with you now. I think there's 6 or 7 of them. And we're just going to do these as lightning rounds. So get your buttons ready. So first of all, craft brewery with retail. Do you think this could fit in the downtown overlay district? Yes, maybe, no, and not sure, which is a little bit looser than maybe. All right, that was a lightning round. Well done. So just sharing the results really quickly. We've got a 62% yes on this, maybe a no, a little bit, 15% of each, and then a not sure on that one. Our next one is small scale manufacturing with retail. So the one I'm showing here is actually a bakery. So they actually, the difference is that they make the items on site, bake the items on site. It's wholesale, but it's also retail. All right, seeing everybody come in, I'm going to end this. So we have a 54% yes and a 38% maybe. So that's interesting. And I will say for some of these that sometimes additional controls on hours, on traffic, on dumpster issues, things like that can also help. And that's where the design guidelines can come in. So this is the next one, co-working spaces. And this has been interesting as I see the responses come in some communities, because some communities just consider this to be, it's an office use. So why would you have it called out separately? You could just have it under office. And it's interesting because sometimes zoning can be almost a form of marketing, right? You're telling people when you have something as of right that this is something that the community wants. And so by putting it specifically in your zoning, it allows people to see that who might be thinking about items or different uses that they might bring in. So again, stopping this lightning round, we've got a 54% yes and a 23% maybe, another 23% not sure. So I'll just show that really quickly while I load up the next one. So then the next one we have is experiential retail. Now this is a nice sort of economic development term. And what it means is it's not just selling something, you've got an experience that goes on with it. So in this case, this is an art studio for kids. They sell art supplies, they do classes for children to learn how to do art. Thinking of a yoga studio that also sells, yoga equipment and clothing, a photography studio that sells cameras as well as does classes as well as takes pictures. This has been a popular thing in some communities. And it looks like we've got a high level of people who are interested in this as part of use. And sometimes, depending on the zoning, some communities don't actually allow this grouping of things to happen. So what we want to do is, if it's of interest, is make sure that this community does. So the next one is not necessarily about specific uses, but more about the use of public land in terms of revitalizing a downtown. And in some cases, this may require a zoning change. In other cases, it may require a policy change. So the images that you're looking at here are actually the corner in Ashland. They've built a little shed with a bathroom in it and counter space that they lend out to pop-up businesses. So, a food truck can come in there or a store. And then they've got various seating areas scattered throughout. There's a little children's playground on it. They use it for community concerts. So it's a way of taking, there's actually a lot that had a derelict house on it. That was owned by the town of Ashland or their housing department. It was taken down and they put this up as a temporary thing, and people have enjoyed it so much that they left it up. All righty, I am seeing a lot more interest on this, a 62% yes and a 38% maybe. So that's helpful. One of the things that communities have done during the pandemic is to allow the use of public space, frequently sidewalk space, sometimes street space, for private use. And in some cases like this one, it is a retail display that is spilling out onto the public sidewalk. We'll test a couple of other things as well, but again, it's allowing this sort of permeability, or this ability for the private use to spill into the public use in order to draw people in and add a little variety to the streetscape. So some communities are developing formal rules for this, which could certainly be put into zoning or some other policy. We're interested in what your thoughts are. All right. And we've got a 54% yes and a 38% maybe. So outdoor dining on a public sidewalk, also something that became much more popular during the pandemic. Obviously, the sidewalks have to be wide enough to allow that, but there's, again, if you think of the front yard setback, allowing a public plaza that maybe shares space with the public sidewalk to do this is one way that zoning could contribute. And I'm seeing that everybody has answered. So we have a 92% yes on this, and a few maybes, which is great. And then this is the last question in this lightning round. So this is outdoor dining. This is actually using public parking spaces. And we're going to talk more about parking in this conversation a little bit later, but the use of public parking spaces for restaurant. You can also use them actually for just open public seating or green space in downtowns that don't have a lot, or public art, or a combination of all of those. All right, great. And so we have a 46% yes, a 31% maybe, and 23% no on this. So thank you very much. That was very helpful in terms of thinking about some of the new uses. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about dimensional standards. So you see here the underlying districts, the dimensional standards. This is from the table of dimensional standards in the zoning. There's a variety of lot areas, fairly consistent in height from R4 to B2. General business ticks up to 45. The industrial 5 district ticks up to 55. Variation in street frontage, a little bit of variation in setbacks, floor area ratio, and lot coverage. What we look for here is there an inconsistency in how the different parcels in a single area are governed, and does that make a difference in terms of people coming in, not just to develop new space, but also in terms of investment. As I mentioned earlier, many zoning districts were created after buildings were already built. So you have the possibility that while these dimensional standards have been set up, that buildings may not comply with them. And we haven't yet done the analysis for that, although we will, to see how many of the existing lots actually in the existing buildings actually comply with this. The problem with that is that if they don't comply, if they're non-conforming with the zoning, it may mean that they have to go through a variance process in order to invest in the building, and that puts up a procedural barrier to investment. The downtown overlay district actually in their development standards governs height at 45 feet and 3 stories, and has a different setback. It's actually more complex than I'm showing it in the box, but I didn't want to take all of our time on the setback. But where that becomes interesting is if, for example, there's a parcel that is in the R4 district that's under the overlay district that currently allows 35 feet. Somebody could use the overlay district and go to 45 feet. The question always comes in, is that enough to encourage somebody to redevelop a property, in that a 35-foot to a 45-foot change may not be enough to justify that, but it may be fine. And that's, again, one of the issues that we'll explore. Be very interested to hear your thoughts in the comments or on our questions. So back to the boundary here, just wanted to call out again that this orange boundary represents a possible expansion of the downtown overlay district. So from this green hatched area to have it apply completely to all of the areas within this. And that would mean that we'd be capturing, if this is of interest and makes sense, capturing more of the I-5 district, capturing that component, that little corner of the B2 district, capturing a little bit more of the R4, the general business, and the R5 here. So what that would do is create this opportunity for Sutton Street along here to become more of that gateway that I asked you about earlier, and to allow for the mills to become a real anchor for an expanded area on this side, while then thinking about what's the characteristics of Main Street here and how does that continue. So just a few more polls to go today. This one, I was actually including this, there are 3 more polls. What do you think about expanding the boundary? So liking it, not liking it, liking the idea of expansion, but not necessarily this boundary, or not sure yet, which is perfectly reasonable as this is our first meeting. I've got a few more. Excellent, that's great. So we've got 40%, 46% who like it, 8% don't like it, and 46% not sure about this particular boundary. So I'll just share that quickly so you can see it. And again, any more comments would be great. So I'll stop that. Now, one thing that I was kicking around, or Andrew and Jean and Dan were kicking around with me in our last conversation, is 125, 133 is right along here. The North Andover High School is here. Would it make sense to extend the boundary even further to capture that? And just a rough drawing, this isn't precise yet, but to capture that and create a second gateway up into this area at Walker Road to really connect 2 sides. So you have a Sutton Street gateway, and then you have this gateway along 125, 133. So I am going to, unsurprisingly, launch a poll to just get a quick temperature check on this. See if you like, don't like, or not sure about this one. And again, I'll say that obviously the responses aren't written in stone here. We're capturing a temperature check from you all to see if this is something that's worth exploring. And we see 46% like, 23 don't like, and 31 are not sure yet, which is fair enough. So finally, I want to really talk about parking in here, because parking in a downtown district is always important. And this was the Downtown Improvements Master Plan from June 2021. It is a diagram of what Beta did, and Beta is an engineering company that did this study, and they did a test of how much parking was used when during the day. So unfortunately, the copy I have of this is a little blurry, so blowing up the image made it a little bit blurrier. But just to note that what they call Downtown West here at 9 a.m. had about 106% occupancy. So there's quite a demand, but it dropped off so that there was 86% full at noon and 75% full at 4 p.m. Downtown core was around 33% at 9 a.m. I'm reading because I know the slide's fuzzy. 12%, or at 12 p.m. it was 38%, and at 4 p.m. 30%. So that tells me that there's capacity in this area at those times. Downtown East has even more capacity. It's a longer stretch as well. And High Street South is a little bit more congested at 9 a.m., but still has 30% of its space is open, and it drops throughout the day. One thing to be thinking about, I saw the preference for more restaurants in the earlier part. We would obviously want to think about what evening parking would be, but noting that that there is this open parking in the area during these times starts to let us think about what are the parking requirements in the zoning, and are those parking requirements appropriate? So I had a look at not just what North Andover is doing, but also what other communities have in their zoning. And I'm not going to go through every single component in this table. We'll be happy to put it online so you can delve into it. But just in terms of some initial things to think about is that in some cases, North Andover's parking requirements are actually higher than communities around the area. I chose Concord because it had been mentioned to me. All the rest obviously are abutting or relatively close by. And I tried to choose a range of community sizes as well and community densities. So we weren't just looking at big cities with public transit that might have a different way of thinking about parking for than North Andover might. So obviously grouped residential in here, also looked at retail. Interestingly, North Andover's retail tends to be a little bit high with the exception of Haverhill. You can see the 6 spaces per, that's, by the way, the definitions are up here, KSF of GFA, 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. So in some cases, the retail is definitely higher. Retail parking requirements than other communities. And so that's an interesting thing for a couple of reasons. One is it costs money to provide parking and it costs land to provide parking. And so in communities that require more parking for a use, it becomes an issue not just of how much it costs to create the parking, whether or not all of the parking that's created is actually being used, and what are you giving up when you require more parking than you need to. So this isn't a definitive analysis, but it starts to give a little bit of a picture. Restaurant now, North Andover is interesting because they do you all do your spaces for restaurant and eating places also based on 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. Many other communities do it on the basis of seats, the number of seats in the restaurant. So you can see Groveland, 1 space per 4 seats. Lawrence is the same. Concord and Haverhill are both 1 space per 3 seats. Concord adds the employee and the largest shift. Andover also has spaces requirement for employees. It makes it difficult to compare. So 15 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area looks like a lot more. It's hard to say if it actually is a lot more. The other thing that's interesting is that some of the places will just have additional requirements just for a drive-through area, not for a whole drive-through restaurant. So it's a hard comparison to make on retail. It'd be interesting to explore what it would mean to change from spaces per 1,000 square feet to spaces per seat in terms of North Andover's requirements. Again, on office, not too far off on just general office, a little bit higher on medical office, a lot higher on on bank branches. So that's kind of interesting to see as well. And again, we would need to do some more modeling to understand the full impact of this on North Andover's zoning. But it does bring up a question for you, and this is our final poll of the evening. What are your perceptions on parking in this area, and what do you think in terms of reducing parking requirements, given the fact that it's not consistently used, given the fact that you're a little bit higher than other communities on certain uses? And also with the question, introducing this idea of trade-offs, if we did reduce the parking, is there something like you'd like to see in its place? Outdoor dining, space for outdoor dining, space for outdoor seating, more landscaping of the sites. So it's not just asphalt and building, but there's actual landscape treatments, or you're not quite sure yet. All right, that's great. I will end it now. And I'll share the results. So we have some people liking it, some not liking it, but more people liking it in terms of the idea of a trade-off, that it's not just we're going to release you from doing parking, but that you have to give something back to the community, and there are these options. And then a few people not sure, which makes perfect sense at this stage in the process. So with that, that is the end of the formal presentation. I'd love to take some questions or comments from the chat here, and just have a chance to chat with all of you about any thoughts that you've had in viewing the presentation, or any questions. And Dan, I don't know if you saw any questions that you'd like to bring to the front from the chat, and then we can recognize people. I think you all, let me just stop the share. You all know how to raise your hand, I hope, but if you can't find it at the bottom of your screen to raise, feel free to show your video and wave, and we'll keep an eye out for that. Dan, anything interesting, anything pertinent that you want to bring out?
There haven't actually been that many questions, but Andrew and I answered a couple.
Great.
The most recent is, does reduced requirements actually mean more parking? Which the answer is no, it's less parking and more landscaping. Right, that's, yeah.
Yep. Yes, and I see Linda's come up. Ron, I see your hand up, and we'll recognize you in a second, but just Linda's point about the adequate parking, we won't be able to attract restaurants or businesses. Yes, and there's a difference between the zoning requirements for parking and the market requirements for parking. So it is possible to say, you know, we would like you to, we require X amount of parking per 1,000 or per seat or whatever. Somebody can always come in and say, actually, I have room for more and I'd like to have more. That's where right now we're talking parking minimums, not parking maximums, although there are some communities who are doing parking maximums. Ron, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just kind of curious. Maybe I just don't know enough about this yet, but why are we doing this? Is this part of a plan that is being developed to expand downtown? Are you looking for public support? I mean, what is this a part of?
Emily, do you mind if I answer that question?
Go right ahead.
So,
Yes.
Ron, just to introduce myself, I'm the Director of Community and Economic Development. So we undertook a downtown improvements master plan that concluded last year. And one of the recommendations, and it's actually a recommendation in our larger form town master plan that was completed in 2018, is really to look at downtown zoning, because right now we kind of have a bit of a patchwork between a few different zoning districts, and to see if we could create some consistency among the different zoning designations that comprise the downtown area. And then while we were doing that, seeing if we could make adjustments to the zoning to, I think it's good practice every few years to kind of review zoning in different areas of town to ensure that it's performing in the way that folks in town want it to perform, especially when taking into consideration things like economic development, housing, aesthetic attractiveness, providing, parking to go toward the issue we were just talking about. So I think it's kind of all of the above. And again, it's really kind of a result of both the master plan and more specifically the downtown improvements master plan, and just sort of building off those planning exercises.
And if I could just add to that, Ron, if I could just add to that. So the overlay, I believe, went in 2007. And I'd say it just hasn't prompted a lot of change. We've had some recent redevelopment that we certainly want to capitalize on and hopefully expand the redevelopment, but there hasn't been a significant change in either building or the uses in our downtown. And so we want to just be proactive and look to see if zoning may be prohibiting the change that public input expressed in both the master plan from 2018 and the downtown improvement plan.
Right. So one of the things that, I guess this is my next question would be, it's one thing to rezone and it's another one to make a lot of changes to what's already there. And so what you have already there is you have small businesses, you have people's homes. And while I would love a more aesthetic appeal to downtown, and I would love it to be a larger area, the risk of disruption to a lot of people is there. So, let's assume that we go through this rezoning. What happens to everybody who is there now?
So as
Emily,
long- yeah, do you
go
want
ahead,
to?
Emily, if you. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the zoning doesn't automatically change anything for people who are there now. It doesn't change what they have. It might change what they want to do. So where the zoning kicks in is if somebody wants to make a change that is depending on how the zoning is written, a change of use, they want to expand, they want to do some sort of addition or new building. And that's where that would come into effect. It could also, to your point, and it's a good one, increase the value of the property, in which case somebody may come and offer them funds because they want to develop that property. Too early to say how that would be affected. Changing zoning doesn't necessarily mean a wholesale change to the zoning. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out with this very first meeting and with the interviews I've been doing is does it need to change? And if so, what needs to change and how much change is that? But your point of whether or not there's a disruption to existing businesses, it's not an immediate one. And it's something that we look at as what are the impacts of a zoning change on existing ownership and existing uses, whether that's residential or commercial. Andrew, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Not really. I would just emphasize the point that it doesn't change anything as far as if you live in a home, in a single family home, for instance, within the downtown area, and you want it to remain a single family home and live in that home, it doesn't require you to do anything. It's just a roadmap to enable redevelopment of properties that do want to seek to change in a certain way. And to the extent that they do, they would conform with the zoning that we put in place based on this public input and feedback.
Mike, I have a quick question? What's the next step for this effort? And when will this presentation be available?
So next step, I was going to do at the end of the Q&A. I've got a slide for next steps.
Okay.
But I can do it now. The next step is to continue the research and then start developing options for what changes we think should happen or could happen based on the conversations that we've been having, based on the analysis of precedents and what other communities are doing. And in terms of the recording being available, I can send it to Dan and Andrew and Jean tomorrow, and then it's just getting it up to cable access at that point. So.
And Dan and Stan will probably also create a web page around this issue and see if we can. We'll create a record of information that will include this recording and any other poll questions or results that come out of this as community input has come in.
Well, it'd be nice.
I was just going to one more thing. Looking forward, the idea would be if we can, do this as a comprehensive process. This isn't something that would really move forward until next year, because as everybody on this in this meeting probably well knows, any zoning changes would require a vote at town meeting, and town meeting this year is well spoken for. So we're looking at next year if we were going to be doing anything as a consumer time.
But it'd be nice to be able to take a look at those maps in more detail that Emily presented tonight and sort of, be able to see them up close. So if that is available somehow, that'd be helpful.
Yep. Okay, great. I saw Luke had his hand up.
Luke has his hand up, yes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for doing this. I think some of my concerns were addressed in a previous question about impact of this. Mostly it's around housing. That's a very high density area for multifamily and also entry level and senior housing as well. So I think that, I promise I'll keep an eye on this and sort of continue to raise my concerns. I appreciate you doing this. I have to learn more about the, what a zoning initiative means and what the potential impact is. I think my concern was primarily around the expansion of that zone and what might be, because there's very little elbow room other than to go up unless you're going into housing areas, as far as I could tell from the map. So I think that would be something I'd want to keep an eye on, but thank you for doing this.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because there will be other opportunities to have input. Again, this is you can tell from some of the questions you asked that this is a broad introduction to the process and to some of the things that we're thinking about. So I appreciate all of you being on the call and helping us see some directions for where we want to go next. And I encourage you to stay involved with the process as we move forward.
Thank you. Mind you, I would love to see a kind of more consistent downtown look
Good
and
to
feel.
know.
I mean, there's two closed banks now, right at the entry points of it too. You know, what happens in those kinds of situations? You know, do they turn into fast food restaurants? What's the process for, you know, revitalizing those kinds of properties too?
Great to hear those concerns. That's really helpful. Alex, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for doing all this. I love the earlier ideas, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the call, but I've seen some of the earlier presentations about making the downtown more aesthetically appealing in terms of trying to underground the wires, expanding the sidewalks, et cetera. I've seen that done in other cities where it works really well. So I think that's great. I think a lot of smart people have put a lot of thought into how to make our downtown more vibrant and attractive, and some good things have been done. But short of a large road going through downtown, we don't have the traffic counts that some other downtowns do. So it strikes me that the way to generate activity down there is you need more people living down there. And I know our town has a fraught history with density and encouraging more density, but I think that one of the solutions to downtown is higher density housing, not just because that's also what I do for work, but I live here in town and I think that would help. So I think that one of the things that should be thought about is the height in downtown. To me, higher is in some ways better. You're putting more housing on less space. You're potentially conserving space that might otherwise be used, and you're bringing more people down to frequent restaurants, shops that are down there. Maybe someday we could have something really cool like an art house theater or something, but you'd need rooftops to support that. The other thing that I think could help with that is some of the underutilized areas that we have. We've got that industrial area on the other side of Sutton Pond. So there's probably some underutilized areas around town, around the downtown area where that could happen. And I like the idea of expanding the other side of Sutton Street as well, and trying to, this is probably a more moonshot goal, but trying to activate a little bit of the river frontage. That's maybe a more long-term goal that is probably outside the realm of this conversation, but the more we activate, you know, that kind of forgotten river frontage, if it doesn't pull focus from downtown. But so back to my main point is I think that more density, looking at the height restriction downtown and the density downtown would probably be a big help to helping the downtown.
Thank you, Alex. Those are really helpful comments, again, for looking to see what the implications are of additional height and how that would work. And also your comments about effectively expanding the boundary are very useful. So as we look for direction, thank you very much.
Emily, can I just interject with a comment and kind of an answer to a previous question? And I just wanted to highlight it for the rest of the group in case they didn't see it in the chat. But someone brought up the issue, and I think it was Kevin O'Donnell, regarding MBTA communities. So just in case people don't know about this or they haven't been tracking the issue, and I wouldn't blame them if they hadn't, the state is actually, they passed a new, an amendment to the Zoning Act that the governor signed into law, which requires communities around the state that have access to mass transit, and that includes North Andover because we are close to the Lawrence MBTA station. It requires those communities to essentially zone for by right multifamily units. And the guidance is being finalized, so things are very much in flux, so I don't want anybody to think anything's happening right away, but it does require communities to adopt zoning districts that comply with the regulations that they're putting forward in this guidance. And the guidance as it currently stands requires North Andover to zone for 50 acres worth of property that could accommodate more than 1,700 new multifamily housing units. Now, again, that is all subject to change. And someone asked, I think Kevin was asking, you know, what is the downtown's role in that? And the really short answer to that is, again, it remains to be seen based on where the guidance falls, but it could be a piece of the puzzle. You know, everybody knows that the potential redevelopment of Royal Crest is at the next town meeting. It's possible that that development could partially at least satisfy the requirement under that new zoning. And then if it satisfied some of that requirement, maybe the downtown could satisfy the rest. So it's something to take in consideration. But I just wanted to raise it because it's an issue that it's on a lot of people's minds, and it is something that folks will hear more and more about if they haven't heard already. And just to sort of also amplify what Alex was just saying, I've worked in other downtowns as well throughout the state as a practicing planner. Salem, Massachusetts, Lowell, Massachusetts, they have very robust downtowns and a lot going on. And even there in those places, you'd be surprised, but they have struggles maintaining active ground floor uses. And the reason is because they need to make sure that they have enough of a market in the form of 24/7 residents who live in and around the downtown. So to Alex's point, there's been a concentrated efforts in downtowns around the Commonwealth to really get more people living in floors above the ground floor so that they can represent the market that will help drive in the health of retail and restaurants that are in the downtown, or even service businesses like dry cleaners and nail salons, hair salons, things like that. So I just wanted to quickly bring that up.
And that's a good point, both of you, in terms of the people above the buildings helping to support those ground floor uses. There's also, as all of you I'm sure have seen, because of the impact of COVID, restaurants, retail, traditional retail was having problems even before COVID. The amount of demand can be tricky for retail and restaurants. So having people there, not requiring ground floor uses to be active in all parts of a downtown are important. You mentioned some gateway cities and other cities. I've worked in Pittsfield, and we actually allowed residential on the ground floor except for a historic core of their downtown, precisely to help support businesses in a close enough proximity to each other that you had that active ground floor space. So that's something else that we will be looking at is where is it critical to have the active ground floor space, and where is it critical to have the residential space? So, and these are all important issues, and I'm delighted that you all are on the call to help us start thinking through some of these. Other questions or comments? Anything else, Dan or Andrew, that you feel should be brought up based on the comments that came through on the chat? All right.
I don't think so.
Well, in that case, just to reiterate the next steps, I don't need to put the slide back up because I already talked to it, but I have a few more interviews to do, and then I'll be working with Jean and Dan and Andrew to consider some precedents, come up with some options to test. And then we'll be back to you, the public, and testing again some of the ideas that we've come up with to see how people feel about them. But what you've brought forward today, just in these lightning rounds, is great direction. Really appreciate your attention to this, and look forward to seeing you at the next step.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.